All right. So I guess we'll get going because we have lots of birds to get through this evening. So thank you for joining us for this evening's Birds of Newfoundland webinar. And today we're going to be talking about waders and game birds. So for those of you who haven't been to one of these before, my name is Catherine Dale, and I work for Birds Canada as the coordinator of the Newfoundland Breeding Bird Atlas. And with me also tonight is Jenna McDermott, who is the assistant coordinator of the Atlas. And Jenna's going to be monitoring the chat and answering your questions as they come up, but we'll also have time for questions at the end. So both Jenna and I work for Birds Canada, and Birds Canada is Canada's voice for birds. So we are the leading science-based bird conservation organization in the country. Our mission is to advance the understanding, appreciation, and conservation of wild birds and their habitats across Canada. And obviously, this is a pretty big mission. Canada turns out to be a large country. So one of the main ways we do this is by running citizen science programs. And these are programs that engage the skills and support of people like you, ordinary citizens who are interested in going out and observing birds and submitting their data to our many databases. And I realize I should have updated this slide. I'm not sure how this one got through the net. So that says that each year our programs engage more than 30,000 volunteers nationwide. That number is actually now 70,000, which is just a mind-boggling number. So clearly, I need to update this slide. I should make a note to myself. Birds Canada has programs all across the country, but here in Newfoundland, we're relative newcomers. So our programs here only started in 2019. And we have two main programs at the moment. We have the Newfoundland Breeding Bird Atlas, and that is our big program here. So basically what this is a 5-year citizen science program that aims to map the distribution of all of the species of birds that breed on the island of Newfoundland. So for our little shorebird example here, this is a spotted sandpiper, and you can see the map there on the right shows all of the places in Newfoundland where spotted sandpipers have been found. And then the color of the square indicates how sure we are that they are breeding there. So with red being, we're absolutely sure that they're breeding there, and yellow being the least sure. So you can see that spotted sandpipers are actually pretty common in Newfoundland. The other program that we run here is the Atlantic Nocturnal Owl Survey. And this is a roadside survey that happens every spring. So every spring between the 1st of April and the 15th of May, volunteers for the Nocturnal Owl Survey go out to their routes, which consist of 10 stops separated by 2 kilometers. And at each stop, they go out and they play a playback track. So essentially a combination of silent listening periods and owl calls. And they report all the owls that they hear and see to our database. So this is a really great program for beginners because we don't have too many nocturnal owls in Newfoundland. And if you're interested in learning more about our owls here and this program specifically, we are doing a webinar on March the 4th about the Atlantic Nocturnal Owl Survey. So join us for that. Okay, so before we get going on our waders and game birds, I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you to all of our sponsors. The Atlas in particular is a huge collaborative effort, and without all of our partners and funders, workshops like the ones we're offering here would not be possible. And I would also like to acknowledge that the lands where we are conducting the Breeding Bird Atlas and the Nocturnal Owl Survey are the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, whose people have been erased forever. And additionally, the island of Newfoundland is the unceded traditional territory of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq people. These people have been protecting and stewarding the land here since time immemorial, and through the work of the Breeding Bird Atlas and the Nocturnal Owl Survey, we hope to contribute to this stewardship and the effort to protect all the species we share the island with. Okay, so the outline of today's talk. Please don't mind this R-rated photo, so many of you will recognize that these yellow legs are in the middle of mating, but it's an excellent photo, so I couldn't resist. So we're going to talk about our waders first, our herons, our rails, and our shorebirds, and then we're going to talk about our game birds. It says geese there, but it's really goose, as well as our grouse and ptarmigan species. We have the same caveat as previous weeks. There's just so much to cover that we've tried to narrow it down by focusing on species that actually breed on the island of Newfoundland. And we focus mainly on the plumage that they have during the breeding season, so keep that in mind. So we'll get right into it, starting with our herons. So this is an American bittern. It's a medium-sized heron. It's actually relatively common here in Newfoundland, but it is a solitary and very shy bird. It likes marshy areas, so they'll nest on the ground amongst the dense vegetation, and they're actually very, very good at camouflage. So when they stand there with their neck up like that, those bold stripes on their neck blend in very, very well with the reeds and grasses. And so they can be very, very difficult to see. So this is actually a really good time to introduce the fact that birds are often far easier to hear than they are to see. This guy is a prime example. So for anybody who's in Newfoundland, just outside of St. John's in the Goulds, there is a bittern that nests every year in Big Good Park. And I have never actually seen this bittern. I have only heard the bittern. So I am going to play the bittern call for you, and hopefully I've set this up so that you should all be able to hear it over the computer. These guys make a really distinctive call. It's a kind of a deep gulping pumperlunk sound. So the only thing I can compare it to is it sounds like water bubbling through my pipes when I run my washing machine. So I will play it for you now. So it's a really distinctive noise. Hopefully you heard that. There's not much else you can confuse it with. To make this noise, what the male actually does is he gulps air to inflate his esophagus, and then he uses the stored air to make the call. It's a really low frequency sound, which works well for him because it carries really well through the dense vegetation of marshes. So marshes, because they're so dense and so tangly, they tend to absorb higher frequency sounds. So by having this low frequency song, the bittern's song travels much, much further. IDQs for the bittern, the bold stripes are a really good one. Thick neck. They've got a black patch that extends down the neck. So you can see running from the base of the bill there, there's a black patch down the neck, and then they have a white throat, which you can often see because they do tend to stand there with their bill raised in the air. All right, I think that's enough out of our bittern for today. We will move on to our other heron species, the great blue heron. And this is the largest, heaviest heron. It's very widespread. So the range extends across North America, and usually great blue herons are common within their range. So I grew up in Ontario, and great blue herons were very, very common there. But it is actually rare throughout most of Newfoundland, with one exception, the southwest corner of the province. There's a small breeding population. So in 2018, that was about 10 to 20 pairs. So that was in the Codroy Valley in the southwest corner of the island. When I was down in that corner of the island last summer, I did see them farther afield, herons hanging around kind of, 100 kilometers from there. These guys can actually fly up to 55 kilometers an hour. So it's quite likely that I was seeing herons from Codroy. There isn't too much you can mistake a great blue heron with. They've got those dark plumes on their heads. They've got that really big dagger-like bill that's orange-yellow, very long, almost snake-like neck, grayish-blue body, and then they've got shaggy plumes on their back and neck when they're breeding. And they forage upright in the water. So if you see a large bird standing by the edge of a body of water, you're probably looking at a great blue heron. They eat fish, and they nest in colonies, often with other species of wading birds. And you'd think that these guys would be ground nesters. They don't look particularly graceful, but in fact, they actually do build their nests in trees. And you would think that a giant bird nesting in a tree would actually be very noticeable, and so it'd be easy to find their colonies, but they're actually very good at keeping those colonies secret. So they can be located in forests several kilometers away from water. Here in Newfoundland, it was actually quite a while before we could list them as a breeding species for Newfoundland, because although birders were reporting seeing them, nobody actually knew where they were nesting. So there's not too many species you'll mistake a great blue heron in flight for here in Newfoundland, but there are some cues to pay attention to. So you'll see that it has very dark black flight feathers, which contrast really dramatically with this powdery blue feathers that on the rest of the body. Usually they fly with their neck tucked in and the legs stretching behind them, but sometimes the neck is extended. And I should just note that there is actually, confusingly, a totally white subspecies of the great blue heron, but it's only found in Florida. So we only have those two heron species here in Newfoundland. We've got the bittern and we've got the great blue heron, but we do sometimes get other fun visitors, and I just wanted to highlight this one in particular. So this is a tricolored heron, showed up in Cape Friels in, I believe, 2021, and was photographed by Kayleen Stagg, who worked for the Indian Bay Ecosystem Corporation at the time. And it was a really, really cool sighting, partly because it's just a really gorgeous species of heron, and partly because the species range, which you can see in the map that I'm showing there, stops quite far south of Newfoundland. So tricolored herons are found in the Caribbean and along the Atlantic coast of the US, but not here in Canada. In 2022, a tricolored heron was also reported at the top of the Northern Peninsula, which I happened to have the chance to see myself. These herons are smaller, darker, and more colorful than great blue herons. So they've got blue, gray, purple, and white plumage, hence the tricolored heron name. And I just wanted to bring these guys up to say that when you're out birding in Newfoundland, you should always keep your eyes open because we do often get very exciting vagrant species. So some weird stuff does turn up here. All right, so we will move on to our rails. We only have two species of rails as well. And the first one is a sora. So this is a small marsh bird. It's about the size of a quail. It tends to be, like most marsh birds, quite hard to see. But happily, it's very easy to hear when it's around. This is the most abundant and widespread rail in North America, but here in Newfoundland, it is a rare breeder. That being said, it is regularly found in some of our marshes. So for example, Lundrigan's Marsh in St. John's regularly has a sora. And there's another marsh in St. John's, I think near Empire Avenue, that regularly has a sora. So they do turn up in the same places year after year. So ID cues for the sora, if you should be so lucky as to see one. The first is that the really obvious thing is that they have this stout yellow bill that looks a little bit kind of like the shape of candy corn. It's just really, really striking, nice, stout, bright yellow bill. They have a gray face, but they have that dark black face mask. And then if you can see behind the sora there, you can just see under its tail, and it's got white below there. So that stands out as well. According to the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, soras walk like chickens that have had too much coffee. So they tend to flick their tail and they expose the white feathers below it. I love sora calls because, again, they are extremely distinctive. The most commonly heard call is this loud descending whinny, which what I think of when I hear it is somebody in the middle of a very awkward situation at a party, laughing a little bit hysterically to try and diffuse the tension. So that is what I hear. I'll play it for you. Yeah, always makes me think of awkward party situations. So both males and females will make that whinnying sound to defend the territory and to keep in touch with each other. And soras also have a second type of call, which is like a two-noted sora, which is where they get their name. And the second note rises in pitch, but the most commonly heard call is that whinny, and it is very distinctive. So these guys are skulkers. They'll be skulking around in the undergrowth in a marsh, very, very hard to see, but you can hear them quite easily. Our second rail, very uncommon here, is a Virginia rail. So this is another small, secretive marsh bird. These guys are specially adapted to pushing through dense vegetation of marshes. So they have long toes, flexible vertebrae, and they have special feathers on their forehead that are adapted to reduce wear and tear because they're using that forehead to push through often sharp marsh vegetation. As I said, they're a very rare breeder here in Newfoundland. They like freshwater marshes with lots of emergent vegetation. We tend to have more bogs and swamps than we do marshes. And an interesting thing about this species is that it builds dummy nests. So in addition to building a real nest with real eggs, they build fake nests. So they'll just build them and as often as a predator deterrent. But I wouldn't worry too much about it because the chances of finding a Virginia rail nest anywhere are relatively slim, and definitely very slim here in Newfoundland. So ID cues for this guy. You've got a gray cheek, but no black face mask like the Sora. Instead of a bright yellow bill, you've got a reddish bill. You can see it's a little bit longer and curving a little bit down. And then that nice rusty cinnamon neck. And then on the flank, behind the leg there, you can see that black and white barn. So these guys, again, as a secretive marsh bird, you're probably not surprised to hear that you're much more likely to hear them than see them. They're really, really good at vanishing into dense marsh vegetation. The calls they make are also kind of hilarious. They make almost pig-like grunts, which trail off at the end. So I'll play those for you. So like the whinny of the Sora, those grunts are used by both males and females to defend territories and communicate with each other. Male Virginia rails also sing a song. I use the word a little bit loosely. It's just a repeated 2-syllable ticket. So if you want to hear that song, you can check it out online. But again, those grunts are the thing you're most likely to hear. Okay, so we're finished our herons and our rails already. Now we're getting into shorebirds. And shorebirds is a little bit of a more extensive list here. Generally, though, when we're talking about shorebirds, what do we mean? It's a pretty broad group. We're talking about several families. They come in many shapes and sizes, but they do share some physical and behavioral traits. So for the most part, they have a preference for open shoreline habitat. They're carnivorous, although not often maybe in the way we would think about it, but they do eat insects, mollusks, and crustaceans. And they tend to have round legs and for the most part, round heads, and for the most part, relatively long legs. They use these to wade in shallow water. Most shorebirds are ground nesting. So they usually lay their eggs in a scrape on the ground. They don't really build a nest so much as just excavate a little depression and lay the eggs. And there's a reason for this. So the best defense for these nests is to remain undetected. So camouflage is really important. So they choose to lay their eggs on substrates that tend to match them. And then the adults are cryptically colored for the most part. That does make them a little bit of a challenging species group to identify because there are a lot of kind of little brown birds here. And the nests, they lack structures that would attract the attention of predators. This also means that you need to be really careful should you find a shorebird nest because many predators hunt by smell. And so you don't want to draw them to a shorebird nest by your scent. Shorebirds themselves, often their preen oil will change chemical composition during the breeding season so that they don't attract predators. So as I said, these guys are pretty difficult to ID, one of the more challenging groups. So what are you looking at in all of these little brown birds? You kind of want to look at the overall shape and structure of birds. So the bill, the legs, the overall body proportions. So even if we look at these silhouettes we have here, you see the guys on the left have much shorter bills and shorter legs than the guy on the right. And then you also want to take into account their habitat choice and their feeding behaviors. So we're going to talk about two shorebird families here today, the plovers. So the family Charadidae, and sandpipers, families Sculopacidae. So plovers tend to be small to medium shorebirds, so they tend to be a little bit smaller. And the silhouettes on the left there are plovers. So they've got short, sharp bills that taper at the end. And then they've got a short neck, or sometimes kind of no neck, and a shorter tail. And these guys use eyes to locate their prey, which gives them a really distinctive form of running. So they will stop and start. As opposed to moving along consistently, they'll run and then they'll come to a stop, eat some prey, run again. And often with plovers, not always, but often, the heads of the species are quite strongly marked. This is in contrast to the sandpipers, which we do have small sandpipers, absolutely, but they can get much larger than the plovers. They have longer bills, so they're thin, long bills that are rounded at the tip, And they actually have nerves at the tip of the bill, and they use this to feel for food while probing the ground. So they don't use their eyes to locate their prey. So we're going to start with our plovers. And here is a relatively common shorebird, certainly the one that I became familiar with first, because it is very widespread. Although, again, like many of the species we've talked about today, it's a rare breeder in Newfoundland. And if you look up the standard range map of the killdeer, Newfoundland's not even included there. So killdeers like open ground and open spaces, but they don't necessarily need to be by water, even though I know I just said that shorebirds all like to be by water. These guys are a little bit more relaxed. You can find them on lawns, you can find them on golf courses, athletic fields, etc. So these guys are actually pretty big, especially for a plover. They have a very long tail. They've got an orange rump. You can just see the edge of it there in the photo. It's a lot more visible in flight. But the most important cue for a killdeer is that double breast band. So it is unique and it is diagnostic for a killdeer, but the young killdeer, when they hatch, just have a single breast band. So they actually can look like some of the other smaller plovers. And then they've got that nice white breast and belly, which is quite distinctive. When I first heard somebody refer to a killdeer, my mental image was not of this bird at all. I was thinking about some sort of huge bird of prey that would, in fact, take down large mammals and kill deers. But this turns out to not be the case. Killdeer were actually named after the call that they make fairly incessantly. So they've also been called chattering plovers or noisy plovers by 18th century naturalists because males make this call constantly. And I'll play it for you now. So these calls are made not only, but also while males make display flights. So if you hear that call and you can't actually find the bird, try looking up. You may see it there. Something else that I wanted to touch on here is the idea of distraction displays. So I did say that shorebirds don't really build a nest, they just kind of plop their eggs on the ground, and that camouflage is really important for them. And this is true, and it is a great defense for the eggs, but sometimes the birds need to resort to other measures. So another tactic that a lot of ground nesting birds, shorebirds in particular, tend to employ is called a distraction display. So this is given to predators, and basically adult shorebirds will fake having a broken wing to draw the predator away from the nest with the promise of being easy prey. And so I know that if you think back to the map that I showed you of the spotted sandpiper distribution in Newfoundland, we had different colors that indicated how sure we were that things were breeding. To be sure that something is breeding, we don't necessarily have to find a nest. We can use cues like this distraction display. So if a shorebird is giving us a distraction display, we would consider that confirmed evidence of breeding. We don't need to see the eggs, we don't need to see the nest or the young, because there's no other reason that the bird would be doing this behavior. And this behavior is extremely striking, very obvious, and much, much easier to see than a nest full of shorebird eggs. So it's a really useful cue that something is breeding, and quite something to see. Moving on to our next plover, the semi-palmated plover. These guys look a little bit like a miniature killdeer, so they're quite a bit smaller, but you'll see that they only have that one breast band. This is maybe not the best photo for the characteristics of a semi-palmated plover because this guy is sitting down, but I had to include this photo just as evidence of the fact that shorebird chicks are pretty much the cutest things in the world. So you can see the little chick there nestled against its parent's side. Semi-palmated plovers breed mostly in the Arctic, but their range does include Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. And you may be wondering about this name. This is another one that confused me at first. But semi-palmated just means that these birds have webbing between their toes for only part of the length of the toe. So their toes are partly palmated, which means partly divided. And there is also a semi-palmated sandpiper, but that does not breed here in Newfoundland. So cues for the semi-palmated plover. You see that single breast band, a little stubby orange and black bill. They've got a round head, a very short neck, And then they've got a black headband and eye patch. So they've got across the forehead an eye patch, and then they've almost got they've got a bit of a nose line there. So they almost look like they have aviator goggles on. These guys also have yellow legs, but obviously you can't see them in this picture. And I just wanted to put this up. So this is another one of those species range maps, breeding maps that I was talking about that we're making with the Atlas. And you can see that we are still looking for breeding evidence for semi-palmated plovers all over the island. So now that you guys recognize them, hopefully you'll be able to contribute to this map. Our third plover here is the piping plover. And this is superficially pretty similar to the semi-palmated plover. You'll find these guys along shorelines. So here in the Atlantic, they like the coast, but they're also along the Great Lakes and in the Great Plains. And they forage alone or in small groups, which is unlike a lot of other shorebirds, which tend to forage in large groups. Piping plovers also tend to stay a little bit further away from the water's edge, and they nest in the soft sand that's relatively high up from the water. So piping plovers have that dark headband, but not the noseband and not the eye patch that we were talking about with the semi-palmated plover. They've got a gray back, orange legs, and then their breast band is narrow and often incomplete. And so I just wanted to take a moment to compare the semi-palmated and the piping plover, because this is an important distinction to be able to make. So you'll see that overall the semi-palmated plover is darker. So piping plovers have a lighter back that's a little bit like dry sand. And it's true that they are in fact masters of disguise, and if they tuck themselves into, say, vehicle tracks on the beach, they'll almost completely disappear. Whereas the semi-palmated plover, their back is a little bit like wet sand. They both have that breastband, but the piping plover breastband is narrow and sometimes incomplete. And then if you look at the face markings, the semi-palmated plover has that black head and noseband, but the piping plover has the black headband, no noseband. And one of the reasons that it's important to be able to make that distinction is because the piping plover is a species at risk. And some of you may actually have noticed that all the photos of piping plovers I've shown here feature them wearing leg bands. So you can actually see that little metal band near the top of the leg there, and the yellow bands as well as the metal band on this piping plover. And this is because piping plover populations, particularly in the Atlantic, are intensely monitored. This species is listed as endangered in Canada after some pretty dramatic population declines. The problem is that unfortunately for piping plovers, they really like to nest on sandy beaches, and humans also really enjoy sandy beaches. Often we like driving ATVs there, walking dogs there, setting up with beach towels to enjoy the sun and sand. But piping plovers are extremely sensitive to disturbance. And so if there is enough disturbance by humans or their dogs, adult piping plovers will just up and abandon their nests. And so a loss of habitat due to development, beach management activities are major issues, and natural predators are also a major issue for piping plovers. So Birds Canada has piping plover conservation programs in a number of provinces, including Ontario, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. And they do things like work with partners to protect nests with fencing and predator exposures to make sure natural predators can't get at them. And then they also have volunteers that help monitor the nests and interact with beach users to increase awareness of the birds and discourage disturbance. And so as part of this piping plover monitoring program, Birds Canada teams and partners band the adults and the chicks to keep track of individuals. Here in Newfoundland, Birds Canada is not responsible for monitoring piping plover populations, but they are monitored by the Canadian Wildlife Service, Parks Canada, and some other NGOs such as Intervale. Okay, so we're moving away from plovers now, and we're moving into sandpipers. And pretty much all of the shorebirds I've mentioned so far have been rare breeders in Newfoundland. But this guy, the spotted sandpiper, is much more common. And he's very distinctive in appearance, sounds, and activity. So spotted sandpipers are actually the most widespread shorebird in North America. And if you're wandering around having birding adventures in Newfoundland, you're pretty likely to come across them. They're found almost anywhere near water. So that includes inland along streams and riverbanks. They like rocky shores. They're pretty much everywhere. They're also really cool because they display what we call sex role reversal. So in this species, it's the female that establishes and defends the territory, while the male is the one that provides the parental care. So he incubates the eggs, and then when the young hatch, he shepherds them around. It's pretty easy to see where spotted sandpipers got their name, and during the breeding season, they have this spotted breast and belly, which makes them really easy to identify. You can also see when they're in flight, you can see a nice white stripe on their wing. I could not find a picture of a spotted sandpiper in flight, but if you check out the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's All About Birds page, you'll see a picture there. They have a nice dark line through the eye and an orangish bill. And then they have olive brown legs. They have a really distinctive song as well, which is a rapid series of tweet, tweet, tweet calls, which I will play for you now. So again, a very distinctive call, but they can also easily be recognized by their movement. So they have a unique bobbing behavior, which can sometimes be called teetering. So they're constantly bobbing up their tail up and down as they walk. And they also have a flight, like fluttering flight that is very distinctive. So I found a video on the internet which shows this bobbing behavior, and I'm going to play it for you because it is so distinct and it's such a fun thing to see. Or at least I'm going to try and play it for you. And keep my fingers crossed. Aha! Success, maybe? Very slow buffering. So he's not doing it yet, but he will. There we go. So there's that really distinctive teetering behavior, that bobbing up and down of the tail. It's a giveaway for these guys. And it is, in fact, such a giveaway that you can actually see this little fledgling spotted sandpiper doing it long before you can see the spots or really much distinctive plumage at all, although you can see the eyeline there, but you can see that bobbing tail behavior. So that's an excellent cue for the spotted sandpiper, and they are just lots of fun to watch. Another sandpiper that we sometimes get here in Newfoundland is the least sandpiper. And the name probably tells you that this is a pretty small bird. This is in fact the smallest shorebird in the world. It's not much bigger than a sparrow, so it weighs approximately an ounce. And in case you're curious, I looked this up. That's about the weight of 4 tumies. So like the semi-palmated plover that we had a few birds ago, this is mainly an Arctic breeding shorebird, but it is a rare breeder here in Newfoundland. We did actually find a couple of them in the central area of the island last year. So cues for the least sandpiper. Its size is a really, really big one, even though, as we've said several times, size can be a difficult cue to use. They've got that sort of hunched posture, rusty speckling on the back, which is more obvious in juveniles than adults. And then they've got a dark bill that curves slightly downward. They have barring on the throat and chest during the breeding season, although not during the non-breeding season. They have a smudgy chest as opposed to those clear bars. And then you can see that they've got white or buff edging around the back feathers. They also have yellow-green legs, which is a diagnostic feature, but it can be really difficult to distinguish because of where they live, these legs are often stained with mud. So leaf sandpipers really like mud flats, and so that can disguise the color of their legs. But if you can see it clearly, the yellow-green legs is one of the features you can use to distinguish it. Another one of our very common sandpipers here is the greater yellowlegs. And again, no mystery where this guy got its name. Here in Newfoundland, these guys are sometimes called twiliks, and they are birds of the boreal forest. They really like bogs. They like bogs a lot. They tend to wade deeper in the water than many other shorebirds. They've got those nice long legs to keep them out of the water. It is a really common bird, but it does tend to nest away from people. So it really likes bug-infested bogs. Believe me, this is something that I am aware of after much personal experience. And this means that actually we don't know that much about them because they don't tend to get studied a lot. So the ID cues for a greater yellowlegs, you've got a small head, and for a shorebird, a pretty slender neck. So you can see a very thin neck there. Barring on the flanks, and then of course those long bright yellow legs and a long sturdy bill. And when I say long, take a good look at the length of that bill. So the key thing here is that the bill is really more than the length of the head, probably more than 1.5 times the length of the head. And that is kind of an important thing to remember, and we'll come back to why. The call of the greater yellowlegs is a clear ringing toot toot toot, which is given in a sequence of 3 or more. And some people say it sounds like the bird is saying its name. So yellow legs. And I'll play it for you now. So you can hear those multiple syllables. Something else that is quite unique about yellowlegs is their determination with alarm calls. So this is another one of those breeding cues that I was talking about with the distraction display. When you have agitated birds perched, in this case, at the top of a tree, alarm calling at you for 45 minutes, as this guy was, as you walk past, that tells you that they've got something that they're very concerned about in the area. So the colloquial names for a yellowlegs, in addition to twilik, these guys are called telltales, tattlers, and yelpers. And this pretty much all refers to these incessant alarm calls that they give. So they're very monotonous, very loud, and quite annoying. They will do that for a very, very long time, as much as you try and steer clear of them. So again, very good evidence of breeding there. Okay, so I did say that greater yellowlegs are easily identifiable, and this is very true, but I'm now going to throw a little bit of a wrench into that because we also have a species known as the lesser yellowlegs. Lesser yellowlegs do not breed in Newfoundland, and they're much less common, so we usually see them migrating through in late summer and early fall. And of course, size is the easiest way to distinguish between these two species. As usual, when something is called greater and something is called lesser, the greater yellowlegs is bigger. So their lesser yellowlegs are about a third smaller than the greater yellowlegs. And they generally look more delicate, but it's not often that you have them happily standing beside each other like they're doing here. So how do you tell a lesser yellowlegs from a greater yellowlegs when you don't have both birds there? And this is where the bill length comes in. So this guy's bill is not more than 1.5 times the length of his head. So you've got a shorter, thinner bill, and you've got fewer markings on the flanks. So the flanks are cleaner, but the thing that I use most often is the length of the bill. The voice is a great cue as well if they're calling. So the most common call that these guys give is single or double noted, in contrast to the greater yellowlegs, which tends to have 4 or more syllables. So I'll play you the lesser yellowlegs call. So again, not those multiple syllables. But again, keep in mind, these guys do not breed here, so we don't need to worry about them in the early summer, but once they start migrating through, it's really important to be able to tell the difference between them. All right, and another sandpiper we have here, again, one of our larger sandpipers, is the willet. So this is about the same size as a greater yellow legs, but you can probably tell just from looking at it, it's bulkier, so it's a stockier bird. Willets are, again, a rare breeder here in Newfoundland, and they tend to nest very close to the water's edge. And they're one of the largest common shorebirds, but they don't have a lot of really distinct markings. So they've got a nice, large, thick bill. They have a back that's mottled, and they have bars on the breast. They have long, dull-colored legs, so that will separate it out from the yellow legs quite easily. But they're actually easiest to identify in flight because they have these really distinct black and white patterns on their wings that are easy to see when they're flying. So when the wings are folded, these guys can be relatively indistinct looking. Okay, I think we're down to our last couple shorebirds. This is one of my favorites, I have to say. So these are plump little birds with almost no neck and a very, very long bill. They're Wilson snipe. They are among the most widespread shorebirds in North America. And these guys are very common breeders in Newfoundland, but they can be quite difficult to see because they have quite cryptic coloring. That being said, sometimes when they're not flying, they do like to perch on fence posts very nicely, like this one has, so you can see them quite clearly then. They do like to nest near water. They like wetlands and damp, muddy habitats. And they look so stocky, thanks in part because they have an extra large breast muscle that makes up actually a quarter of the bird's weight, basically. So the highest percentage of all shorebirds. And because of this, they can fly extremely fast. So these guys can reach speeds that have been estimated at 60 miles an hour, which is relatively amazing. And you guys may wonder about this name as well, the snipe. So the word sniper originated in into the 1770s amongst British soldiers in India who hunted these guys as game. So they have a fast, erratic flight style, which makes them really difficult targets. So if you were able to hit them, you were a good sniper. So ID cues for this guy, again, really thick neck, almost no neck. Looks a little bit like a bird football player. Very long bill. They have short tail and short legs, barring on the flanks, and then a nice white belly. If you can see the back, you can just see the edge of one of those stripes right now, but they have 3 buffy stripes down their back, and then they have a striped crown. But pay attention to the direction of the stripes. So they run sort of vertically between the eyes. So from the bill towards the back of the neck. You'll notice that they have eyes set really, really far back on their heads, even for a shorebird. So what that means is that Wilson snipe can actually see almost as well behind them as they can in the front and to the sides, which makes it really difficult for predators to sneak up on them when they're feeding because these guys almost literally have eyes in the back of their heads. So you can hear here the call of the snipe, which is not actually a vocal call. This is a flight display noise that is actually made by air passing over specially modified tail feathers. So these guys perform flight displays. The males will circle up high and then dive. And as the air passes over those specially modified tail feathers, it makes this noise. And probably many of you will have heard this noise before. It is quite common. As I said, snipe are cryptic. They're good at hiding, but they're often heard. And you can often hear the noise and not be able to actually locate the flying snipe. And I think our last shorebird here today is the American woodcock, which is in some ways a little bit similar to the snipe. So it's another plump, very long-billed shorebird. So it's stocky with a short neck, big eyes, and set quite far back in the head. But unlike other shorebirds, these guys actually like forests. So you can see from the picture there, they like sort of scrubby, leafy undergrowth where their plumage gives them really excellent camouflage. These guys are a rare breeder here in Newfoundland with what we think is a relatively restricted range towards the west coast. But with that being said, these guys are actually most active at dusk. And so it's possible that they're more common than we think, and they're simply not being well detected because people are not out birding at that time. So we do actually have one in a recording that was taken near Flat Rock. So it is actually possible that these guys are much more widespread than we thought they were. And that's something that we are hoping to detect with the Atlas. So IDQs for woodcock, they have gray stripes down the back. They have cinnamon underparts, and contrast those with the white underparts and the barred flanks of the Wilson snipe. They have a long straight bill. They have a gray collar, and they do have stripes on their head. And I will just pull up a better picture of the head. The stripes go in a different direction than the Wilson snake does. So those stripes run horizontally between the eyes as opposed to from the front of the bill to the back of the head. And that's an easy way to tell the difference between the two of them. Again, these guys are more likely to be heard than they are to be seen. So at dusk and dawn, the males will show off for females with these loud eat calls. So I'll play the call for you. So these guys will also do aerial displays like the Wilson snake will, but obviously the song that they're making is completely different. And they give those from a display area on the ground. So it's a quite distinctive sound. And if you hear that, that's definitely an interesting one to report to the Atlas. Okay, so I think we are now done our whirlwind tour of the shorebirds. This is by no means all of the shorebirds that can be found in Newfoundland, but it is the species that breed here. So during the fall migration, you'd expect to see many, many more species here in Newfoundland. It's actually an important stopover ground for many species. We do also see some migrating shorebirds stop off here in the spring, but usually in the spring, the birds are in more of a hurry to make it to their northern breeding grounds. So many will migrate straight through to the Arctic, through the center of the continent, and they'll bypass Newfoundland entirely. But in the fall, along the mudflats and rock coastlines, you'll often see large mixed flocks of shorebirds that are feeding on invertebrates and fueling up for the southward journey. And if you happen to be here in the fall, Cape Creels in particular on the northeast coast is an excellent place to go to see these migrating shorebirds. Okay, so we come to the game birds part of the evening, and luckily we don't have too many game birds here because we're obviously running late on time already. So game birds is pretty much any bird that is hunted for food, so things like pheasants, grouse, quails, etc. The family Phasianidae. And theoretically, if we're talking about game birds being any bird that's hunted for food, that would actually include geese and ducks, but traditionally they're not included in this category. That being said, for convenience's sake tonight, I am going to include Newfoundland's one breeding goose species, just so that we can cover that one off as well. So for the most part, birds in this family are chicken-like. They're ground-dwelling birds that eat primarily seeds and buds, but will also eat insects in the summer. And they have a characteristic takeoff. So it's a little bit explosive. A lot of these birds won't take off until your foot is literally in the air over them, and then they'll sort of explode out from under your feet with rapid beats of their stiff rounded wings. So the first one that we're going to cover is the ruffed grouse. So ruffed grouse are not native to Newfoundland. They were introduced into several areas in Newfoundland in the 1960s and 70s to provide game for hunters. So these guys are forest understory birds. You can actually see that a little bit in the picture there. They eat leaves, buds, and the fruit of deciduous trees, and ruffed grouse are very wary of humans. And they'll often, as I said, wait until people are very close before they explode up into the air. So the name ruffed grouse refers to the feather tufts that you can see on either side of the bird's neck in this photo. And both males and females have ruffs, but females have a less conspicuous ruff. Ruffed grouse are ground nesters, and they are year-round residents here in Newfoundland. And I have a couple pictures because I couldn't find one picture that showed all of the characteristics that I was hoping for. So these guys have a little bit of a crest on their head. You don't see it as much in the previous photo, but you can see it in this photo here. So they've got a little bit of a crested head, and then they've got dark bars on their flanks. So you can see white flank with dark barring on it. They do have that ruff, which is relatively conspicuous most of the time. Often it's a lot darker than this guy. This could be a female or an immature bird. And they have that really nice black band at the end of the tail, which you can see there, a really clear black band. And that's a really useful feature for identifying them. Again, I feel like I've said this a lot tonight. This bird tends to be more often heard than seen. So male ruffed grouse make a characteristic drumming using their wings, and this drumming can be heard over really long distances. So typically what they do is stand up on a raised surface like a stump or a log, and they beat their wings back and forth. And its sound actually comes not from their wings hitting their body, but they actually create miniature sonic booms while they pump their wings back and forth. So this sounds a little bit like a helicopter or a lawnmower starting up deep in the forest. And it's a strange call because it's one you almost feel before you hear. So I'll play it for you. So again, very, very distinctive, very cool to hear. You'll often think, where's the helicopter, before realizing you're in a place that a helicopter is definitely not accessing. We have one other species of grouse here, also introduced for game hunters in the 60s. This is a smaller bird than the ruffed grouse, and spruce grouse are considerably less wary of humans. They can seem quite tame because when approached by a predator, they hold still most of the time, and they rely on their camouflage to hide them. So the Newfoundland name for spruce grouse is a fool hen, because they don't seem too bright sometimes. These guys eat primarily pine and spruce needles. They also do really like blueberries, though. I mean, everybody likes Newfoundland blueberries. So ID cues for the spruce grouse. You've got a gray head and neck, white spots on the lower belly, which you can't see here, and then a black throat and chest and a red eyebrow. Good way to distinguish them from the ruffed grouse: they don't have a crest on the head and they don't have a black tailband. Spruce grouse, unlike ruffed grouse, are more sexually dimorphic. So the males and the females do look quite different. This photo here, you may think it's a female sitting on a nest, but it's actually a male taking a dust bath. So they will roll themselves in the dust. The females come in two different color morphs, gray and chestnut, and they look a little bit like the ruffed grouse females. So they don't have that red eyebrow, among other things. They are smaller than ruffed grouse females. They've got a significantly shorter tail and barred underparts. And again, you'll see there's no crest and there's no band on the tail. And I'm just throwing this picture in as incentive to bring you all here to Newfoundland to get out looking for spruce grouse. We often found them. In 2021, we found them in almost every location we went looking for birds, and we would usually come across them with these wonderful little fluffy chicks. Spruce grouse were largely silent, so we don't hear them making noises in the forest like we do ruffed grouse, but we do, in fact, come across them with chicks quite a bit. They're quite easy to find. Okay, so now we're going into our two ptarmigan species. So we have two grouse species and two ptarmigan species, but the ptarmigan species are native to Newfoundland, so they were not introduced. Willow ptarmigan is the largest of North America's three ptarmigan species, and it's relatively common. So it's a tundra dweller, likes tundras, but it moves into sheltered valleys for the winter. And in Newfoundland, we find them on our maritime barrens that are near the tips of the major peninsulas. and as well as opened upland areas. So for example, Grouse Mountain. So the willow ptarmigan, the male, in this case, the breeding male, has a nice chestnut neck and red eyebrow and a short, stout bill. White belly, and they have those wonderful feathered feet, which act as snowshoes in the winter snow. You've got a nice short tail, and then the back you can see is kind of a combination of white and mottled. The female willow ptarmigan is more mottled all over. It's mottled brown, black, and white during the breeding season. And you can see that it provides relatively amazing camouflage on the tundra. So this photo was not taken in Newfoundland, it was taken in Alaska. But there is a bird in there, in case you're wondering. And again, these are the kind of birds that will stay still until you have your foot in the air over them. In winter, both males and females of willow ptarmigan turn white and blend in with their snowy surroundings. So they essentially completely lack distinguishing marks in the winter. They're just white, and they have, as I said, those wonderful feathered feet which function to walk over the snow. Our second species of ptarmigan here is the rock ptarmigan. So these are mostly found in the Arctic. Newfoundland is actually the southern extent of their range in North America. And they are similar in appearance to the more common willow ptarmigan, but willow ptarmigan are larger and browner. Rock ptarmigan spend their lives on the tundra or tundra-like terrain, and they'll move closer to the coast in the winter. So in Newfoundland, you can find them in cool Arctic-like areas like the tablelands of Grouse Mountain. So they like rocky areas, as their name indicates. So they've got a red eyebrow, a short bill, a white belly, and a mottled brown back. And habitat is really important when you're looking at ptarmigan. You're looking at rocky tundra areas, you're probably looking at a rock ptarmigan. The female rock ptarmigan are mottled brown, black with a small red eyebrow, and the chicks are, again, as many shorebird and gamebird chicks are, pretty much adorable. In the winter, rock ptarmigan also turn white, but they do have a distinguishing mark. So you can see that black stripe there that runs from the bill to the eye, and males will also have a pronounced red eyebrow in the winter. So male rock ptarmigan will actually stay white much longer than the females. Females lose their winter plumage quite quickly. Males will stay white during courtship, and after courtship finishes, you've got this bright white bird in not so much a white landscape. They'll actually often intentionally dirty their feathers to hide from predators until they've fully molted into their brown summer plumage. So just to take a moment to compare the willow versus the rock ptarmigan. Willow ptarmigan males are redder than rock ptarmigan in summer, and they've got that lovely cinnamon head and neck. So they're pretty easy to tell apart. That cinnamon neck stands out quite distinctly when compared with the mottled brown of the rock ptarmigan. Rock ptarmigan also have darker backs if they have molted. So remember, the rock ptarmigan males stay white for longer than the females. In the winter, the tell between the two species is that black eye line. So the willow ptarmigan is essentially completely white, whereas the rock ptarmigan has that black line between the bill and the eye. The females of the two species are, in all honesty, extremely difficult to tell apart. So willow ptarmigans apparently have a stouter bill than rock ptarmigans and are a warmer brown. But again, those are cues that are really most useful if you have the two standing beside each other. So probably your best clue is going to be either the male that she's hanging out with or the habitat. So rock ptarmigan, as we've said, they like barren, rocky areas. Willow ptarmigan are found in tundra areas with more vegetation. So the female ptarmigan are a bit challenging. And so I figured we'd finish today with a very non-challenging species that almost everybody's familiar with. Our only breeding goose species here in Newfoundland, and that is the Canada goose, of course. And I felt a bit silly putting these field markings on them because everybody is quite familiar with them. Certainly where I grew up in Ontario, In Waterloo, in fact, people at the university get regularly chased by Canada geese, but they are actually considerably less common here in Newfoundland. So you've got a nice even brown body, you've got a black head, and then that really evident white chin strap. Long black neck, black tail, and white undertail. Tells us that it's Canada goose. Okay, so we are finished all of our game birds and shorebirds and waders. And so we now have our quiz section. Remember, nobody's getting marked here. Answers are anonymous. So just take your best guesses at the 7 species that I have here to show you. So we will start with this one. And I guess I have to launch the poll first. Questions are not in the right order, so I need to make sure that I'm launching the right question. So what species do we have here? Take your guesses.
The poll is still not showing up on my screen, Catherine. I don't know if other folks are having that issue as well.
That's interesting. Yes, because I think everybody is, because
no answers are coming in.
No answers are coming in, so it didn't show up at all.
I'll see if I can launch it on my side.
Okay, you try launching it. Make sure, just keep in mind the questions are not in the right order. So
okay, yeah. Question 1. Interesting. Okay, I'm trying to launch it. Oh, somebody said it launched already. Oh, someone said it launched twice for them.
Okay, we're having some poll issues today.
This person's seeing it twice too. Oh no, okay.
It did show up twice.
Can you see it now?
No, it's not showing up on my screen.
Okay, what is happening here?
Okay, let's reset and we'll put it back up maybe.
Okay, I've got it up right now. Can anybody else see the poll right now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm not getting any answers though.
Oh, weird. There's a lot of people saying that they can see the poll.
I can confirm it doesn't show up like it has in the other webinars, but we can see the question and the options, just doesn't pull up.
Some people have seen it 3 times now.
Okay then. Well, this is an interesting, of course, the one day we decide not to test the polling, naturally this is what happens, right?
I think it's being submitted into like something we'll be receiving, but maybe not showing.
Oh, interesting. Huh. Okay. Well then, I'm gonna say answers in the chat. Jenna, can you monitor the chat?
Sure can.
So is this a killdeer, a semi-palmated plover, a piping plover, or a sora? What are people saying?
There's a lot of piping plovers. There's a semi-palmated, mostly piping plover coming in.
Mostly piping plover. Okay. One semi-palmated. Do we have any killdeers or sora?
Not that I've seen.
All right, I'm going to end this poll because it's not super useful. If I share results, do you see the results?
One person says yes, they see them. Yes, there's several people that can see the results. Everybody can.
Okay, well, our apologies for the technical difficulties. So it sounds like it really comes down to between semi-palmated plover and piping plover. And Jenna, since I've got you here, would you like to tell us which one it is?
It's a piping plover.
And why is it a piping plover?
Well, because they look pretty similar to semi-palmated plovers, but piping plovers don't have that dark line in front of the eye as well as the headband. They just have the headband.
Just the headband and the lighter color of the back, right? So you can see that it matches quite well with the dry sand there. So absolutely, piping plover. Thank you, Jenna. All right, I know that I'm going to regret this, but I'm going to try the poll again just in case it wants to work this time. You never know. Okay, I still have no answers, so I'm guessing that the people can't answer. But you can see the questions. So
People say they can see it and they're answering, so everyone can see it but us.
Everyone can see it but us. Yes, but where are the answers going? The problem is I can't see the answers. So let's go with the chat again. Do we have a Wilson snipe, an American woodcock, a Sora, or an American? I think that should say bittern and not bitters.
We're getting a lot of snipes in the chat. We have a woodcock and see what else is coming in. More snipe. Lots of snipe.
Okay. Well, you guys are obviously right on it. So yes, it is indeed a snipe. It's obviously too small to be a bittern, which is a medium-sized heron. And it's got too long and thin a bill to be a Sora, which has that nice candy corn bright yellow bill. So Wilson snipe and woodcock are the only real options, and we can't really see the color of the underparts there, so we can't compare white underparts with cinnamon underparts, but you can see the direction of the stripes on the head. So the stripes run from the bill to the back of the head, and so we're looking at a Wilson snipe and not a woodcock. Okay, well, I'm going to keep launching the polls so that people can see the options at least. Where's my question 3? Okay. So in this case, what species do we have here? Is it a Virginia rail, a spotted sandpiper, an American woodcock, or a Sora? And answers in the chat again, I think. I mean, you can keep answering the poll, but we don't know where the answers are going, so.
Okay, we've got lots of answers coming in so far, and Virginia rail is the only contender so far.
Nice. You guys are right again. This is indeed a Virginia rail. It's obviously not a spotted sandpiper. Among other things, it lacks spots. It doesn't have a thin enough bill. The bird itself is too stocky, and it's not a woodcock, so the eyes aren't far enough back. It does not have a long straight bill. It doesn't have those stripes between the eyes. So it's really whether it's a Sora or Virginia rail, and it doesn't have that bright yellow candy corn bill, and it doesn't have the black face mask. So Virginia rail it is. Okay, this one may be a little bit trickier, but again, let's see the options. So do we have a lesser yellow legs, a greater yellow legs, a willet, or a wimbrel?
We have some answers coming in.
I see the chat numbers going up. I can't, can't see the chat itself, but.
So we have Virginia rail, might be a holdover from the last question. I don't remember if that was one of the options or not. We have willet so far. Willet, greater yellow legs. See if any more come in a second here, but that's what we've got so far. Some more willets.
Okay. You guys are hard to fool today, so it is indeed a willet. So this is about the same size as a greater yellow legs, but the bill would actually be too short for it to be a greater yellow legs. And the bird itself is stockier with a thicker neck. And if you look at just the tops of the legs, you can see they're not yellow. So that's your big cue. No yellow legs. So in this case, it's a little bit of a nondescript bird. So we've ruled out the greater yellow legs. We've ruled out the lesser yellow legs. So the options are wimbrel and willet. Some of you may be thinking you didn't mention wimbrel. You're absolutely right, I did not. That is one of the species that migrates through here but does not breed here. So it would have been a mean one to put up. You can tell the difference between wimbrel and willet because wimbrel have a long down curved bill, a very long down curved bill. These guys have a nice straight bill, so it is indeed a willet. Okay, I think we have a few more here. So I have to remember what question I actually got to there. I think this should be question 5. So is this a ruffed grouse, a spruce grouse, a willow ptarmigan, or a rock ptarmigan? And yeah, better put the answers in the chat. You see, the answers are a little slower coming in this time.
Oh, we could just got a bunch at once for a second.
Oh,
We have rock ptarmigan, we have spruce grouse, willow ptarmigan, rock ptarmigan, spruce grouse, willow ptarmigan, rock ptarmigan, spruce grouse, spruce grouse,
okay, so nobody's liking the ruffed grouse.
spruce grouse. I haven't seen a ruffed grouse so far.
Any more? Okay, we'll stop there. This one is a little bit trickier, and honestly, these grouse and ptarmigan, I really struggle with these. This is a spruce grouse. So we ruled out the ruffed grouse pretty quickly. We've got we have no crest. We can't really see if there's a band on the tail. It is not really white enough to be a breeding willow ptarmigan, and doesn't have that nice red chestnut neck. So then we're really down to rock ptarmigan and spruce grouse. It does not have a white belly, and it does have, you can just see the edge of it there, a black throat. So we're looking at a spruce grouse. All right, I think we've got this one and one more. So again, I will launch the polls so people can see the options. And I will try to anyway. Aha, here we go.
So is answers rolling in.
Oh, okay. See, we don't even need the poll. Is it a Sora, a great blue heron, a tricolored heron, or an American bittern?
So far, we have a lot of votes for bittern. American
Any
bittern.
votes for anything else?
No votes for anything else so far.
All right. Well, you are indeed correct. It is a bittern. That one I don't think needs too much explanation. It's too big to be a Sora. It's also, the bill is too big and too dagger-like to be a nice candy corn Sora bill. The coloration pretty much tells you it's not a great blue heron, and tricolored heron, again, that would be a mean trick because we don't have them breeding here. But also, again, the coloration tells you it's not a tricolored heron. There's not too much you can mistake for a bittern. Okay, and this is our last question. So what do we have here? Do we have a lesser yellowlegs, a greater yellowlegs, a spotted sandpiper, or a least sandpiper?
We have some trickling in. Lesser yellowlegs and greater yellowlegs are fairly even split so far. Oh no, there's more lesser yellowlegs. Oh, here's another greater yellowlegs. Greater yellowlegs, lesser yellowlegs.
Okay, so it sounds like people have picked up on the color of the legs, which again, you can just barely see there. It's wading pretty deep in water, as yellow legs tend to do, but you can see that it does in fact have yellow legs. So that rules out 2 of our options. This guy is actually a greater yellow legs, but it fooled me as well. I thought it was lesser. It looks very delicate to me. It's got that nice thin neck, but the bill length is actually more than 1.5 times the length of the head. So it is in fact a greater yellowlegs. Luckily for us, during the breeding season, we don't have to worry too much about breeding lesser yellowlegs here. However, as I said, they do migrate through. So starting in even as early as the beginning of July, you can see lesser yellowlegs coming through. Okay, that was the last question. Apologies again for the technological difficulties tonight. Thanks for bearing with us and answering in the chat. We will try and get that sorted out for next week so we can go back to the polling method. But yeah, for now, there's our website there, the Birds Canada website, as well as the Atlas website. And if you're enjoying the talks We always love to get donations, and you can email us with any questions at nlatlas@birdscanada.org. And otherwise, we hope we will see you back here next week, when we will be talking about what is next week's, Jenna? Is it?
I just
birds
looked
of
it up
prey?
and it's raptors and woodpeckers, so
Excellent.
should be fun.
Lots of fun.
Thanks,
Okay.
Catherine. There's lots of thanks coming in as usual to the chat, and no one minded the poll issue, so
That's good. Man, I thought we had this technology figured out by now, but clearly not.
yep. We don't have any questions in the chat so far. So I think we're probably not getting any tonight. But feel free, of course, if you do have any to pipe up and ask while we're still here.
Absolutely, yeah.
People liked the video today. The spotted sandpiper is very funny to watch doing
That
his
is so
modeling.
funny to watch.
Okay, it looks like I don't think we have any questions coming in, so everybody have a really great night, and we'll hopefully see you next week.